Right now, on March 3rd, 2026, the Strait of Hormuz, the single most critical energy corridor on the planet, has effectively stopped moving oil. Not slowed down, not operating under stress, stopped. Tracking data confirmed 0 commercial tanker transits through the world's most important choke point on March 1st and March 2nd. Over 150 loaded tankers are sitting at anchor in open Gulf waters right now, waiting, burning fuel, going nowhere, clustered off the coasts of Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. No captain is willing to sail into an active war zone without insurance coverage. And that coverage no longer exists anywhere in the market as of this morning. And into that frozen, unprecedented standstill, Secretary of State Marco Rubio walked up to a microphone on March 2nd and said this: "The hardest hits are yet to come from the U.S. military. The next phase will be even more punishing on Iran than it is right now." That is not diplomatic language. That is the top diplomat of the United States publicly promising more destruction while the world's most critical oil corridor sits frozen. Think about what that combination actually means in practice. The strait is already shut. Insurance markets have already collapsed. Oil is already up over 14% in 5 days. And Washington's public message is, "We are not done yet." That is the sentence that every energy trader, every tanker operator, and every central banker is sitting with this morning. So the question right now should be obvious. If the strait is already closed and oil is already spiking, what exactly does the next phase look like, and who pays for it? Because what is unfolding on March 3rd is not a threat or a standoff. It is an active economic rupture, and most coverage is still treating it like a military story. Let's go back 5 days, because the sequence of what happened and when tells you far more than any single headline from this week. On February 28th, the U.S. and Israel launched coordinated strikes on Iran under Operation Epic Fury, targeting missile sites, naval infrastructure, and leadership. The strikes killed Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. Iranian state media confirmed his death on March 1st and declared 40 days of national mourning. That single fact, the death of the Supreme Leader, changed the entire strategic calculation of everything that followed inside Iran's command structure. Iran responded within hours of the first bombs falling. The IRGC launched coordinated missile and drone strikes against U.S. bases across 6 Gulf countries simultaneously: Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, the UAE, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia, all targeted in the same operational window before the smoke had even cleared over Tehran. And then Iran turned to the Strait of Hormuz. The IRGC commander declared it closed and said any vessel attempting to pass would be, in his exact words, set ablaze. That declaration triggered a cascade in global shipping markets faster and more severe than anything seen since the 1980s tanker war. The dominoes fell in hours, not days. Norway's Guard and Skuld, Britain's North Standard, the London P&I Club, and the American Club in New York all canceled war risk coverage for Persian Gulf vessels within hours of each other. Without that coverage, tanker operators cannot legally move through the zone. The ships don't move, the oil doesn't flow, no formal naval blockade required. Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd, 2 of the world's largest shipping operators and widely regarded as barometers of global trade, both suspended all straight transits until further notice. The benchmark freight rate for very large crude carriers hit an all-time record of 423,736 per day on Monday, according to LSEG data. That was a 94% increase from Friday's close in a single weekend. Now here is the number that frames everything else in this story, and it is the reason this particular choke point carries this much weight in global markets. 20 million barrels of oil per day. That is what normally flows through the Strait of Hormuz, roughly 20% of all global oil consumption, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. Add to that nearly 20% of global LNG trade, including most of Qatar's exports, flowing through the same narrow corridor, and the true scale of what is now frozen comes into full focus. There is no pipeline network, no alternate sea route, and no emergency reserve program that replaces that volume on any realistic timeline. The math simply does not work. Saudi Arabia's East-West pipeline and the UAE's Fujairah pipeline combined carry roughly 8 million barrels per day under optimal conditions. The strait normally moves 20 million. That 12 million barrel gap is the leverage point this entire conflict is built around. And as of March 3rd, that gap is open and bleeding directly into global markets. Brent crude was trading at $73 per barrel going into Friday. By Monday, it had closed near $79. And on Tuesday morning, today, it jumped again to $83, according to CNBC market data. That is a 14% move in 5 trading days. Diesel futures hit their highest in nearly 3 years. European natural gas surged over 70% after Qatar halted LNG output due to Iranian drone strikes. Barclays told clients in a published note that Brent could reach $100 per barrel as the security situation continues to deteriorate. UBS said a material disruption could push spot prices above $120. Those are not fringe scenarios from obscure analysts. Those are published institutional calls written after the shooting started. with full knowledge of what is happening on the water right now. Rubio's March 2nd statement, "The hardest hits are yet to come," landed into that environment not as a signal designed to end this quickly. It landed as confirmation that the pressure is not going away this week. In my view, the most important story right now is not the missile counts or the battle damage reports coming out of Tehran. Those are the visible surface of something much deeper. What actually matters is the insurance market collapse, the 150 tankers sitting idle in open water, and the freight rate records being broken in real time. Those are the mechanisms through which a military conflict becomes a global economic event, one that touches every country on Earth that runs on energy, which is all of them. The Strait of Hormuz has never been closed in its modern history. Not through the 1980s tanker war, not through 4 decades of Iranian threats, not through any escalation cycle before this one. We crossed that threshold 4 days ago. The question on March 3rd is no longer whether a disruption is happening. It is how long it lasts and what 100+ oil does to a global economy already under stress. Now, if you want to understand what Iran actually has positioned inside that waterway, the specific weapons, the geography, the reason the US Navy cannot simply escort tankers through and call it done, stay with me. The fast boats get all the media attention. What sits beneath the surface and on Iran's 3 strategic islands inside the strait is far more dangerous and far cheaper to deploy. Before we go deeper, drop a comment right now. Do you think this resolves in days, or are we looking at weeks of disruption? I read every comment, and on this one I genuinely want your read on it. Hit the like button if this kind of layered analysis is what you come here for. It helps this reach more people while the story is still moving this fast. Here's the detail that almost no mainstream coverage is saying out loud right now, and it reframes everything happening in the Strait. Iran does not need to sink a single American warship to win this phase of the confrontation. It never did, and it was never designed to. What Iran needs is to make the Strait feel ungovernable long enough that the economic and political cost in Washington exceeds whatever military objective sits on the other side. And the architecture Iran built over the past decade to achieve exactly that is far more sophisticated than the fast boat footage that gets replayed on cable news every time tensions spike. Let's start with what the US military has actually done to Iran's Navy in the past 5 days, because that context is essential before we get to what remains. On March 1st, Trump posted on Truth Social that U.S. forces had destroyed and sunk 9 Iranian naval ships, describing some of them as relatively large and important. CENTCOM confirmed the sinking of an Iranian Jamaran-class corvette at a pier in Chabahar during the opening phase of Operation Epic Fury, with satellite imagery showing smoke rising from the Konarak naval base. On March 2nd, CENTCOM confirmed striking the Shahid Bagheri, Iran's 40,000-ton drone carrier, in service 13 months, though full independent damage assessment had not been confirmed beyond the CENTCOM statement. According to Naval News, 2 days before the strikes, Iran had 11 ships operating in the Gulf of Oman. After the first 72 hours of Epic Fury, that number had dropped to 0. Iran's naval headquarters was struck and largely destroyed. Multiple naval facilities at Bandar Abbas, Iran's main naval hubs, were hit. The Kilo-class submarines docked there were targeted along with the frigate fleet. By any conventional military scorecard, the U.S. Navy has inflicted serious damage on Iran's surface fleet in the opening days of this operation. That part of the story is real and significant. But here is what makes the situation in the Strait still dangerous and still frozen despite those losses. And this is the part that damage assessments alone do not capture. Iran's most strategically consequential tools in the Strait of Hormuz were never its surface ships. The surface fleet was always the visible layer. What matters most sits underneath the water and along the coastline. Iran operates around 25 submarines per Global Firepower's 2026 estimates. Ghadir-class and Fateh-class vessels built specifically for the shallow, acoustically chaotic waters of the Persian Gulf. These are not blue water vessels designed to chase carriers. They were purpose-built for shallow Gulf waters, an environment where advanced sonar systems genuinely struggle to track slow, quiet targets on the seabed. The usable shipping channels through the strait's narrowest point measure roughly 2 miles wide in each direction. Every vessel, warship or commercial tanker, is compressed into those same predictable lanes. A small submarine operating near the Iranian coastline in that corridor doesn't need to hunt its target. According to defense analysts at Army Recognition, it simply needs to wait for the target to arrive. Iran's submarine doctrine doesn't require any single boat to succeed. The strategy is deliberate layering. Dispersed submarines, combined with minefields, turning the strait into what analysts call a layered denial zone. Iran's mine stockpile sits in the range of 5,000 to 6,000 are, according to defense analysts, including bottom influence mines that are extraordinarily slow to clear and far more disruptive than their raw numbers suggest. Here is the critical insight that changes how you read every headline about this conflict. You do not need to detonate a single mine to win the economic battle. The credible threat alone is sufficient. The moment intelligence suggests Iran is seeding mines, insurers pull coverage within hours. Documented behavior rooted in the 1980s tanker war, a memory still embedded in every major underwriting desk in London today. No coverage means no transit. No transit means no oil flow. And that can happen without Iran firing a single weapon or issuing a formal naval order. The mechanism is insurance, not firepower. Now add the layer that sits above the water's surface. Iran's 3 strategic islands, Abu Musa, Greater Tunb, and Lesser Tunb, sit directly in the middle of the strait. Iran has controlled them since 1971. From those islands, drone swarms don't need range. They are already inside the engagement zone before any defensive system on an approaching vessel has fully cycled through its threat assessment. The U.S. Navy's layered defense against drone swarms is real. Phalanx close-in weapon systems, rolling airframe missiles, and directed energy weapons being tested on select surface combatants. The cost-exchange ratio of swarm warfare is deeply unfavorable for the defender. Each U.S. intercept costs $400,000 to $2 million. An Iranian one-way attack drone costs a small fraction of that to build and deploy. You win a swarm engagement by exhausting interceptor inventories until the defender accepts damage. A strategy proven in real combat by the Houthi Red Sea campaign against American destroyers from 2023 through 2025. According to Defense Security Monitor, Iran entered this conflict with an estimated 2,500 ballistic missiles and a large drone inventory, replenished significantly after the losses of the June 2025 12-day conflict. By Monday, Iran had fired 165 ballistic missiles and 541 drones at the UAE alone. Kuwait absorbed 97 missiles and 283 drones. Qatar reported 65 inbound. Bahrain intercepted 61 missiles and 34 drones, all within one coordinated operational window on the same day. Most were intercepted, but the volume of projectiles ensures some get through, and on this occasion, several did. The Ras Tanura refinery in Saudi Arabia was damaged. Qatar halted all LNG production. That is not a military force being destroyed. That is a military force demonstrating decentralized, sustained strike capability, even while absorbing massive losses at the command level. In my view, this is the most important thing to understand about what is happening in the Strait right now. The US and Israel have degraded Iran's conventional naval capacity significantly. That is real. Iran's denial capability was never housed in surface ships. It lives in hardened, distributed infrastructure across hundreds of miles of Iranian coastline, far harder to find and destroy than ships in a harbor. Rubio confirmed this on March 2nd, when he stated the U.S. mission specifically targets Iran's short-range ballistic missiles and naval capabilities, the twin threats to global shipping and American forces in the region. That framing tells you something important. 5 days into the most intensive U.S. military campaign in this region in decades, the Strait threat has not been eliminated. It has been pressured. And pressured is not the same as resolved, a distinction that will define the next phase of this conflict. What this suggests is that the frozen strait on March 3rd is not about residual Iranian naval strength. It is about uncertainty. And in energy and insurance markets, uncertainty is functionally identical to physical closure. The economic effect is the same either way. A tanker captain doesn't need confirmed mines to refuse transit. A shipping company doesn't need a formal blockade to suspend routes. They need only a credible probability of attack with no insurance backstop. That condition exists in full as of this morning. The strait is frozen not because Iran won a naval battle. It is frozen because Iran shifted the risk calculation decisively enough that the global shipping industry chose to stop moving until the picture becomes clearer. That is sea denial doctrine in its most refined form. And it is working right now in real time, regardless of how many Iranian ships are sitting at the bottom of the Gulf of Oman. Now here is the layer that ties this entire military picture directly to what happens in Washington, in Riyadh, in Beijing, and in every energy ministry from Tokyo to Berlin in the next 72 hours. Iran's calculation, per Defense Security Monitor, is that Gulf states will face enough economic pressure to lobby Washington behind the scenes, pushing for a close to the conflict rather than joining it themselves. Given that Brent hit $83 on Tuesday morning, European gas futures have surged over 70% this week, and Qatar has halted LNG production entirely. That calculation is not obviously wrong as of today. In the next section, we are going to look at exactly what those numbers mean for the American consumer, for the Federal Reserve, and for an administration that came into office promising to lower energy costs. The economic dimension is where the real decisions will be made, not in the strait, but in the gap between $60 baseline oil and $130 disruption scenario oil. What that gap does to inflation, to interest rates, and to the political calculus inside the White House is the story that comes next. This morning, March 3rd, the Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped more than 1,000 points. The S&P 500 fell 2%. The Nasdaq was down 2.1% by 10 a.m. Eastern Time. That is not a correction. That is markets pricing in a war they do not yet know how to model, and doing it in real time while the Strait of Hormuz sits frozen. And here is the detail that cuts right to the heart of what American households are going to feel in the next 2 weeks. Not in the abstract, but at the pump, today. The average price of a gallon of gasoline in the United States jumped 11 cents overnight, according to AAA data published this morning. The national average now sits at $3.11 per gallon. 11 cents in a single night, before the war is a week old, before sustained oil disruption has had time to fully work through the refinery and distribution chain. Oil analyst Tom Kloza, advisor to Gulf Oil, said wholesale gasoline prices could rise 25 cents immediately, translating to 5 to 10 cents per day at the pump for at least a little while. Gas Buddy analyst Patrick DeHaan estimates crude prices will push U.S. gas prices up 10 to 30 cents in coming days, with some stations potentially seeing increases as high as 85 cents per gallon. Gas prices were already at $3 per gallon nationally as of Friday, a level the Trump administration had been publicly celebrating as evidence of its energy policy working. That narrative is now under direct pressure. Per Mark Zandi, every sustained 1 cent increase per gallon adds $1.4 billion to annual American gasoline spending. Prices moved 11 cents in a single night. That math is already running against U.S. households. Even if you don't drive, the impact is nearly impossible to avoid. Trucking firms, facing higher fuel costs, add surcharges that move through to grocery prices, delivery fees, and manufactured goods within weeks. Oil analyst Andrew Leipow put it directly. Higher diesel is bad for truckers, railroads, and the consumers who depend on them. It's really bad for farmers, he added, as the spring planting season is about to begin. That timing is not incidental. It is the worst possible moment for a fuel cost shock to hit agriculture. Diesel futures surged nearly 12% on Monday, the biggest single-session move in years. Diesel is not just truck fuel, it is the engine of the American supply chain, and it just got significantly more expensive. Now layer on what was already happening to inflation before a single bomb fell on Iran. The Fed's preferred measure, the PCE index, was at 2.9% as of December, well above the 2% target. The January producer price index came in at 3.6% year over year, well above the Fed's target and above economist forecasts, per CBS News reporting published on Friday before the strikes even began. The Institute for Supply Management reported Monday that more than 70% of manufacturing managers reported higher prices in February, an 11.5 percentage point jump from January alone. In other words, inflation was already running hot before this conflict started. The war did not land on a stable economy. It landed on one already dealing with price pressure from multiple directions at once. That is the context that makes the Federal Reserve's position right now so difficult to navigate, and the bond market is already communicating that difficulty in real terms. U.S. Treasuries fell for a second consecutive day on Tuesday, according to Bloomberg. The two-year yield jumped as much as 12 basis points to 3.59%, approaching its highest level this year. Traders now price in roughly 80% odds of more than one Fed cut this year. As recently as Friday, markets fully expected 2 cuts. That expectation has shifted significantly in just 72 hours of open conflict. New York Fed President John Williams spoke Tuesday morning, saying policy is well positioned and that further cuts would be warranted if inflation moderates as expected. He did not address the Iran conflict directly, a deliberate omission that is itself a signal about how carefully the Fed is choosing its words right now. The Fed is watching, it is not acting, and it will not act until the energy picture stabilizes, meaning the central bank's path is now directly tied to what happens in the Strait of Hormuz. The political dimension of this is impossible to separate from the economic one, and it deserves to be stated clearly and without bias. Trump came into office promising lower energy costs. The administration repeatedly cited falling gas prices as a signature achievement. The strikes on Iran now threaten to reverse that record directly and publicly. Spiking energy prices could damage the political prospects for Trump and Republicans ahead of midterm elections. A calendar pressure every political strategist in Washington is acutely aware of this morning. JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon put it plainly on Monday. A short conflict won't be a major inflationary hit, but a prolonged one would be a fundamentally different story for the American economy. That statement from the head of the largest bank in the U.S. defines the economic stakes cleanly, short and contained, manageable, long and sustained, potentially damaging to the broader American economy. ING analysts were starker in a note published Monday. A second supply-side inflation shock, arriving while tariff inflation is still unfolding, could make further rate cuts hard to justify in the near term. In my view, second supply-side inflation shock is the most important framing of what is happening right now. The Fed already spent 3 years fighting the last inflation surge. The Fed rebuilt its credibility by holding rates high and tolerating economic pain to bring inflation down. Cutting aggressively into an oil spike would risk undoing all of that, and every Fed official knows it. That puts the Fed in a near impossible position, unable to easily support an economy facing both an energy shock and slowing growth simultaneously. Baird strategist Ross Mayfield put it simply, a 2-week oil shock won't move the needle much. A multi-month step-up in price levels would have a real impact on policy. Multi-month is doing a lot of work. A sustained disruption is what a frozen strait creates as its baseline. Not a tail risk, but the direct consequence of a war, Rubio told Congress, would last as long as it takes. Now, here's the layer of this economic story that is almost entirely absent from the American financial press coverage and deserves considerably more attention. Here's the argument you will hear most often. The U.S. is the world's largest oil producer and a net energy exporter. It imports very little crude directly from the Persian Gulf. So why should Hormuz hurt America? That argument is correct as far as it goes. But oil is a global commodity priced on one world market. When 20% of global supply freezes, every barrel everywhere reprices, including the U.S. domestic benchmark. Retail gas prices move roughly 2.5 cents for every $1 move in crude. Brent has moved approximately $20 per barrel in 5 days. That arithmetic is already working its way toward every pump in America. Beyond oil, there's a second economic transmission channel, the collapse of Qatari LNG output. Qatar halted all natural gas production after Iranian strikes hit its Masaid and Ras Laffan facilities on Sunday. Natural gas was already 10% more expensive than a year ago in the U.S., partly due to AI data center demand. The Qatar shutdown tightens global LNG supply at exactly the worst possible moment. European natural gas futures have surged more than 70% since the conflict began, raising electricity and heating costs across markets deeply interconnected with American manufacturing supply chains. In my view, the LNG dimension of this conflict is being systematically underreported. It carries its own inflationary weight entirely separate from oil, and it is already moving in the wrong direction. This cost will land on American households, at the pump, in grocery bills and heating costs, and in the rate relief they were promised but are now unlikely to receive on schedule. The duration depends entirely on how long the strait remains closed, and on what Iran's new, fragmented command structure decides to do with the geographic leverage it still holds despite the losses it has absorbed. Because the leadership that authorized Iran's previous strategic restraint is gone. Khamenei is dead, the succession is contested. The IRGC commanders now making operational decisions are the same ones who publicly promised not a single drop of oil would leave the region. That is the final piece of this economic story, and it connects directly to what happens in the coming days, both in the water and in the rooms where the political decisions get made. In the next section, we look at Iran's leadership vacuum. Who is giving orders inside the IRGC now, and whether anyone in Tehran can still authorize a diplomatic exit before the next escalation arrives. This morning, Israeli jets struck the Assembly of Experts building in the Iranian city of Qom, the precise body constitutionally empowered to choose Iran's next supreme leader. An Israeli security official confirmed the building was targeted during an active session. Iran's Mehr news agency disputed this, saying the building was empty at the time of the strike. The building was struck either way. It is now severely damaged, and Iran's succession process has been violently interrupted before it formally began. That single strike changes the diplomatic and military calculus of this conflict more than almost anything else that has happened since Saturday. Here is why. When Khamenei was killed, Iran still had a constitutional path, Article 111, that could produce a new supreme leader capable of authorizing a ceasefire or engaging the Omani diplomatic channel. That process has now been struck twice in 72 hours. The Assembly's Tehran headquarters on Monday night, its Qom offices on Tuesday morning. The body constitutionally empowered to select a new supreme leader is now a confirmed military target, struck while actively meeting to do so. President Trump confirmed on Tuesday that Iran had reached out wanting to negotiate. His response, posted publicly on his social media platform, was 3 words: too late. That statement, paired with the Qom strike, tells you exactly where U.S. and Israeli intentions stand as of this morning. The goal is not a ceasefire. It is the systematic removal of every institutional node capable of maintaining Iranian state authority. The diplomatic backstory matters enormously, and has been almost entirely absent from U.S. broadcast coverage. On February 25th, just 6 days before the strikes, Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi publicly stated that a historic deal to avert military conflict was within reach. Araghchi was speaking ahead of Geneva talks, with Vienna technical sessions scheduled for the following week. He described Iran's position as opposing nuclear weapons while defending peaceful enrichment. None were held. The UN Secretary General confirmed this in a Security Council statement after the strikes began. Preparations for Vienna had been made. He said he deeply regretted that the opportunity for diplomacy had been squandered. Oman's Foreign Minister al-Busaidi, Washington and Tehran's primary back channel, wrote that active negotiations had once again been undermined, and that neither U.S. interests nor global peace had been served. That condemnation from Oman is significant. Oman maintained relations with both sides for decades and facilitated the original 2015 nuclear deal as a quiet back channel. When Oman's foreign minister criticizes U.S. actions in this language, it signals that the primary back channel between Washington and Tehran has been severed. Now, examine what Iran's institutional landscape actually looks like on the morning of March 3rd, because the command structure matters enormously for what happens to the Strait. The Interim Council formed Sunday consists of President Pezeshkian, Chief Justice Mohseni Ejei, and Ayatollah Arafi. On paper, it holds executive authority. In practice, power is exercised by the IRGC, which is itself now operating without its commander-in-chief, Mohammad Pakpour, killed in Saturday's strikes. IRGC-linked Telegram channels were citing Deputy Chief Ahmad Vahidi as the likely acting commander, appointed by Khamenei 2 months ago, but not officially confirmed by any Iranian government statement. That is the command structure controlling the Strait of Hormuz right now. No supreme leader, no confirmed IRGC chief, a contested transition council, and a deputy commander whose role has not been formally announced. Professor Hassan Ahmadian of Tehran University made the key analytical point. Khamenei championed a doctrine of strategic patience, absorbing blows to avoid all-out war. That doctrine died with the supreme leader, Ahmadian told Al Jazeera. The new calculus: if attacked, Iran will burn everything. Field commanders freed from clerical oversight are likely to respond with far greater ferocity than the previous leadership would have authorized. This is the specific danger of a decapitation strike that eliminates not just a leader, but the institutional buffer between military hardliners and operational decisions. The succession candidates themselves tell a revealing story about where Iran's internal politics could move, and which direction the IRGC is likely to push. Khamenei made succession preparations during last June's 12-day war. His 3 candidates, per the New York Times, were Hijazi, Mohseni Ejei, and Hassan Khomeini, all killed in Saturday's strikes, Trump confirmed. The attack was so successful it knocked out most of the candidates, Trump said. It's not going to be anybody that we were thinking of because they are all dead. What remains are candidates with less knowledge of Khamenei's negotiating red lines, weaker ties to Washington's back channels, and, in the hardline faction, less interest in any settlement that resembles capitulation. Mojtaba Khamenei, the supreme leader's son, has strong reported links to the IRGC and the Passage. Father-to-son succession is historically controversial in a republic founded to dismantle dynastic rule. But in a wartime environment, the IRGC's institutional preference carries a weight that peacetime political norms cannot override. The Soufan Center analysis published Monday described the ideological tensions inside the Transition Council as potentially fatal to diplomatic progress. The 3 council members represent fundamentally different positions on U.S. engagement, and reaching consensus on de-escalation would be structurally difficult even without active bombing. Ali Larijani, Iran's top security chief and the key operational decision-maker for national security affairs, is described by multiple analysts as the most likely figure to manage any eventual de-escalation channel. Per the Soufan Center, Larijani's likely strategy is to sustain a war of attrition, raising costs for the U.S. and Israel until a ceasefire can be framed internally as a strategic success rather than a surrender. The most likely diplomatic exit is a negotiated pause both sides can frame as a victory. Every strike on Iran's governing infrastructure makes that framing harder to achieve on the Iranian side. Here's what this means for the Strait. The IRGC commanders controlling the closure are not on the Transition Council. They are not in the assembly of experts. They are operational commanders executing a strategy of economic pressure, the only lever Iran can apply at scale without direct naval confrontation with the United States. As long as the Strait stays closed, Iran bleeds the world economy and forces Washington into a more difficult domestic position. The exact inflation, gas price, and Fed paralysis dynamic from the previous section. The IRGC has no incentive to open the Strait unilaterally while succession is unresolved. Opening it would surrender the primary bargaining chip without receiving any formal concession in return. The disruption is not a side effect. It is the strategy. The closed strait is how Iran converts military vulnerability into economic leverage over the most powerful economy on Earth. 3 things could change the IRGC's calculus: a ceasefire giving commanders political cover to stand down, a military defeat severe enough to make strait operations impossible, or a political resolution. This morning, not one of those 3 conditions is anywhere close to being met, and there is no clear pathway to any of them in the near term. The strait remains closed, the oil tankers remain anchored, the insurance underwriters remain withdrawn. The 150-plus vessels are frozen in Gulf waters waiting for a signal that has not come. We started this video with a single question. What does it actually mean when Rubio says the hardest hits are yet to come? Here is the full answer across 4 sections. It means the economic wave is still building, not receding. 11 cents overnight at the pump, diesel up 12%. The Fed frozen, rate cuts delayed. The Dow down more than 1,000 points this morning. It means the military situation is still active, 150 plus tankers anchored, insurance withdrawn, and IRGC commanders executing a strategy of economic pressure that the U.S. Navy has not yet neutralized. And it means the political situation is the most dangerous of the three. A decapitated leadership, a succession body struck twice in 72 hours, a diplomatic backchannel publicly described as severed. The hardest hits are yet to come because the conditions that would prevent them do not exist. No ceasefire, no political resolution, no Iranian leadership with the authority to negotiate. Whatever comes next will determine whether the disruption you have been watching becomes a manageable short-term shock or deepens into something that reshapes the global energy order for years ahead. This channel will keep tracking it as the situation develops. If this analysis added to your understanding, the like button is the best way to tell us to keep going. Subscribe to get the next update the moment it drops. The strait is closed, the succession is interrupted. The diplomacy is publicly described as dead. We will keep watching, and we will keep reporting what the numbers and the facts actually say.